Do you dare tell me I was wrong? I do not make mistakes. The Sun Rune always lends its divine protection to the just.
I do the announcements! I am the second coming! I speak for God now!
Smoley!
Alright, we're here at last with the final mainline game in the Suikoden series, and only a mere 4 months later than I initially intended. If you're new here, or just need a refresher and don't have the time to watch all the previous videos, which I've arranged in a nice little playlist for everyone's convenience, the short version goes like so. Good, holy shit this is one of the best RPGs on the console, fuck me running, close but no cigar, and the milkiest of milk toast.
My fantasy come true! I am Butter Toast!
The long version? After creating one of the best RPGs on a console famous for great RPGs, series creator Yoshitaka Murayama split with Konami near the end of production on Suikoden 3, leading to a game that, while still beloved by many, I wound up very frustrated with by the end. Following that, Konami, being their usual selves,
Look at me!
decided that the best option would be to rush a 4th game out the door so fast that half the plot had to be left in a spin-off game, leaving us with the Japanese equivalent to Dragon Age 2. Interesting ideas, but not enough development time to flesh them out fully, and painfully repetitive combat. I mean, seriously! After a while I could predict the next encounter down to the number of enemies in the room. Would it have killed EA to give BioWare more time?
Yes.
Back on topic, I have no opinion as of yet on the aforementioned spin-off game critical to understanding Suikoden 4, as I didn't realize how critical it was to filling in the gaps of 4's plot. And I also kept forgetting to buy it whenever I had the money because I'm an idiot. Thus, I left myself with no choice but to continue on to Suikoden 5. Released in 2006 for the PS2, Suikoden 5 was a co-production between Konami and Hudson Soft. And despite what my dumbass claimed in the Suikoden 4 video, the team behind 4 and Tactics were not responsible for this one. This is what I get for checking Moby Games and only looking for how many credits were shared between the games instead of what they were specifically credited for.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
The actual team responsible for Suikoden 5 was, much like 4, composed of newcomers to the franchise. In fact, several senior staff members have surprisingly few credits to their names to this day. Director Takahiro Sakayama's only prior directing credit was for the GBA version of Silent Scope, something I didn't even know existed until today, while scenario writer Kazuyoshi Sugawa had at least some experience with RPGs prior to this, having worked on Phantasy Star 4 as well as the Genesis version of Nihon Falcom Sorcerian. His actual writing credits are few and far between, only credited for the scenario of that aforementioned Sorcerian port and for the Sword of Etheria. A Japanese PS2 game that only got a PAL release, you say? Oh, that's a great sign. Really, Suikoden 5's credits go on and on like this. The most experienced members of the whole team as far as I could tell were sound director Shohei Bondo and music director Ichiro Shimakura, both Hudson Soft vets. Now of course, Konami is notoriously stingy about which staffers are allowed to be credited on their games. Quick reminder that they cut everyone who left with Suikoden creator Yoshitaka Murayama out of the credits for Suikoden 3, so it's possible that there was more experience here than it seems at first glance. There was certainly more talent than it might seem looking at the lack of credits. Screw it, I'm not going to drag this out or play coy about it. Suikoden 5 is a fantastic game. It took 3 tries to get the formula right on PS2, but I'll be damned, the least likely team did it.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Set 5 years prior to the events of the first game, Suikoden 5 pulls us south to a wholly different continent as we take on the mantle of the Prince of the Queendom of Falena. Neat, a matriarchy. You don't get those front and center in video games too often. Well, outside of the Underdark, that is. But that's less a fantasy take on matriarchy and more someone's dommy-mommy fetish made manifest. Which, you know, fair. Here, though, it's portrayed as a simple fact of life rather than a way to make their society feel more alien to the player like how it is with the Drow. Beyond the female-dominated royal line of succession and the no girls allowed dragon cavalry...
No light beer! That's girl stuff! Girls are gross! Ah!
Dick, it's cool. She's gone. There's no more girls, man. There's no more girls.
Falanan society appears to be pretty egalitarian, with nobody caring all that much about what's between someone's legs so long as they can do their job. So there's actual nuance here and not just a clumsy attempted message about how sexism is bad. Don't get me wrong, that message is absolutely there, but it's weaved into the narrative as subtext instead. All of which is to say that being a Falanan prince means jack of all shit in terms of political clout. You're basically there to look pretty, handle the less important diplomatic visits, and polish your combat skills in order to make for a more appealing marriage candidate. In other words, you're the male version of a Disney princess. And I've got to say, that's an intriguing concept for a main character. I don't always need to play as the guy destined to become Super King Big Nuts, you know?
Those words, is it possible to use them in a sentence together like that?
This would be about the point where I start recapping the prologue before getting into the nitty-gritty of the gameplay. But holy shit does Suikoden 5 have a massive prologue. Not only does it take close to 6 hours before the main plot starts kicking into gear, it's so densely packed with important dialogue and little character moments that we'd be here all day if I tried to do the same dramatic recap I've done with the other 4 games. So for the sake of my own sanity, we're going to do the Cliff's Notes version. Falana's recent history has been a bloody one, with both a brutal war of succession and an attempted invasion by the neighboring New Armis Kingdom. Because of this, many factions within the country sought to pressure the royal family to use the nation's revered Sun Rune as a weapon against Falana's enemies. Backed into a corner, your mother, Queen Arshtot, was forced to take on the burden of the Sun Rune just to keep it out of the hands of those who would weaponize it. However, the rune has a corrupting influence on its wielders, driving the normally kind and reserved queen to violent fits of anger and megalomania. This is best personified by your visit to Lord Lake at the start of the game, a place where she used the Sun Rune's power to go full scorched earth on the town and the surrounding area as punishment for an uprising. To no one's surprise, this has not exactly endeared her to the citizenry. Even the ones who don't despise her are certainly scared shitless of incurring the queen's wrath. Only your dad, Farid, seems capable of calming Arshtot when the Sun Rune takes hold. As Lord Lake fully demonstrates, though, he can't always stop her before it's too late. In the middle of this mess, we also have the 2 most influential noble factions in the Senate, one led by the militaristic warhawk Marskal Godwin, and the other by the sleazy opportunist Salim Barrows, both seeking to gain control over the royal family. And with the sacred games due to be held for the first time in 16 years in order to choose a husband for your little sister Limslia, who is 10, the factions are eager to seize on this opportunity. And because we have to weigh this gladiatorial contest in favor of the rich and powerful, despite the fact that the future king is expected to serve as commander of the Queen's Knights, entrants are allowed to choose a second to fight in their place. Meaning that Godwin's obvious sociopath of a son, Giselle, and Barrow's useless twit of a son, Urim, are the clear frontrunners in the tournament thanks to their money being able to buy the best possible fighters.
Darn those Decepticons that do anything to satisfy their own needs.
Most of the prologue focuses on attempting to undermine the scheming of both Godwin and Barrows with the help of your bodyguard and Queen's Knight in Training Leone, your Aunt Cyalides, and returning from Suikoden 2,
I'm not babysitting anyone, George.
Wait, it's pronounced George? All these years I've been pronouncing it Georg. Why drop the second E if you're gonna pronounce it the same?
In a word,
Chaos.
Despite the brief hope spot of finding an independent candidate who isn't a complete asshole making waves in the tournament, I mean relative hope, this still involves marrying a child off to an adult. The Godwins remain a step ahead of you and cheat their way to victory in the finals. But without definitive proof of their cheating, you're forced to accept the result, meaning that your aunt's ex is going to marry your 10-year-old sister. You're gross, Middle Ages. You're gross. Though your parents have no intention of simply rolling over for the Godwins, and begin hatching a plan of their own while you take limb on the traditional pilgrimage that all girls in the royal family are expected to undertake prior to their wedding, giving you a few cute moments with your sister before shit hits the fan. And also an uncomfortable moment that goes full anime when the game does a, "Are you really sure you don't want to peep on the purification ritual?"
No.
Strangely enough, I have no interest in watching my little sister in the bath, or her teen bodyguard, or my aunt, or my other aunt who I didn't know about until we reached this mountain. Back to the disgusting thing that the plot actually portrays in a negative light, You return home as the Godwins arrive at the palace to celebrate the child marriage. One incredibly tense party later, both sides spring their plans into action. But despite seeming to have the upper hand at first, the royal family are swiftly overwhelmed by Godwin forces buoyed by the elite assassin organization Nethergate, a group which had been thought disbanded until this fateful night. Before you can try to turn the tide or even just get Lim to safety, George informs you that both Arshtat and Farid have been killed and that the only thing you can do now is leave behind everything you've ever known and flee into the night. With no other choice that doesn't end in death, you're forced to escape to the east and seek shelter with the Barrows family, who are as eager to make you their puppet as the Godwins are to make Lim theirs. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. From the very first combat encounter, you can immediately tell that we're going back to the gameplay style of the first two games. Finally! 6 individually controlled party members and the classic 3 in front, 3 in back formation. I can once again enjoy combat without feeling like the game tied a hand behind my back. Additionally, they've replaced that counterproductive need to level your Unite attacks from Suikoden 4 with a much more subtle and clever idea. All Unite attacks now have a base multiplier that then applies bonus damage based on how high your relationship values are with the participants. Now, the system itself is pretty rudimentary, as you can only affect these values by picking the right dialogue options, but having more than just a small handful of dialogue options actually have an impact feels like a big step forward for the series. Of course, it also means that this is probably the biggest headache in the whole franchise when it comes to recruiting. Unless you have psychic powers, using a guide is damn near required if you plan to get all 108 stars. You pick one wrong dialogue option because your fat thumb slipped at the worst possible moment and you wind up having to trek all the way back up this stupid mountain a second time just to get the other 2 bandits to join. Oh, I needed to bring their buddy too. Okay, back to HQ.
A few minutes later.
He's here now, why won't you fuckers—
A little longer than a few minutes later.
I have to talk to this one specific background NPC back in town first. Would it have killed the wiki to give me all the steps I needed so I don't have to keep going up and down like a mountain climbing pogo stick? This is what I get for not using Suiko Source like usual. Okay, they're recruited. I can move on with my life. Now to never use them again out of sheer spite for that runaround.
I've been so lonely in here. Such terrible thoughts one has, alone, in the dark.
Stepping back to the combat, magic has been downgraded from the absolute necessity at all times it was for almost all of Suikoden 4, back down to the traditional RPG path of becoming increasingly handy as the game progresses. Particularly once you find the sorcery formation, which boosts the magic of the rear party member by a whopping 20. Oh yes, alongside the return of the classic formation, Suikoden 5 introduces a whole swath of new formations to try out, each with their own associated stat bonuses and unique battle skill. Admittedly, I didn't notice the whole formation skill option until I was over halfway done, and by that point, the sorcery formation had become so integral to my strategy that I didn't dare deviate from it. So here's its OP formation skill that lets you cast the same spell twice in a row for the cost of 1. Having to give up the rest of my party's turn so Zaras can drop 2 meteors on a boss is hardly a penalty at all. Normally I have more fun with melee-focused parties buffed by support magic, but I gotta say, Like Not Snide Goth Sister makes me reconsider the usefulness of those squishy mages. Also returning in Suikoden 5 is Suikoden 3's skill system. If you've seen my video on it, you might recall that this was one of the few features introduced in that game which I felt was a welcome addition to the series. I grew up on stat-heavy computer RPGs like Morrowind and the Neverwinter Nights series, so while I'm still generally terrible at them to this day, anything that gives me more skills or feats to customize how I build my characters will always catch my attention. Unfortunately, how it was implemented here wound up being one of 5's very few missteps for me. Unlike in 3, where every skill was a passive that had an effect at all times, 5 changes it to only being able to equip 2 skills at a time. Thus, for most of the game, it's a waste of skill points to bother improving unequipped skills. It's only once you start finding epic skills that this slightly changes, as they require an A rank in each skill associated with them before you can even begin training an epic skill. But then you run into the problem that most of the epics don't exactly live up to the name, as they provide a combined stat boost that pales in comparison to the individual stat boost provided by normal skills. The only characters these epics tend to be worth it for are the ones who come with an unequipable unique skill. because we hadn't hamstrung the potential customization enough, apparently. Making up for that disappointment is the increased viability of support characters, as 5 now allows you to bring 4 extra characters along with your active party, which means that I no longer have to choose between getting free healing or extra money after each battle. And, because it doesn't just have to be support characters in these slots, if the plot requires me to bring characters that I have no interest in along, I can throw them on the back burner while I build up the ones I do like. That's all I've ever wanted! Well, that and army battles I actually have fun with rather than merely tolerate. No. There's no fucking way they actually managed it this time.
And at that very moment, deep within Faffy's litter box, something horrible was stirring. But who cares? Back to our story.
Holy shit, they did it. A clear, understandable, if not entirely logical, how are spears weak against cavalry, weapon triangle, the ability to swap around my units right before a battle instead of needing to set them in advance, and a sense of challenge without being overly punishing to the strategically inept such as myself? No. Words. Should have sent a poet. Comical exaggeration aside, army battles in 5 are a massive step up from every other mainline Suikoden. Moving away from the turn-based strategy of previous titles, Suikoden 5's army battles instead take their cues from console RTSs like Ogre Battle. Hey, does that mean I can finally say I covered an RTS? No? If Kingdom Under Fire the Crusaders didn't count, why would this count, you stupid motherfucker? Who put this in my script?
My job is done. See ya.
The core conceit of army battles here is nice and straightforward. Infantry beat archers, archers beat cavalry, cavalry beat infantry. Which type of unit you get is dependent on the unit leader, or, in a few cases, 2 or 3 characters part of the same unit can form a unique one. Certain characters also command upgraded versions of normal units like rune archers or spearmen. Though like I said earlier, this does lead to the weirdness of spearmen being weak to cavalry due to being considered an upgraded form of infantry. But it's an acceptable sacrifice for being able to actually enjoy myself during these segments for once. You're given access to a number of skills to help tip the balance of power as well. These can range from strategic movements like a charge, to casting magic, to passive buffs. Properly utilizing these to your advantage becomes critical the further you get in the game, as the Godwins mass larger and larger forces against you. And referring to them as army battles may have been a bit of a misnomer, as there are plenty of naval encounters along the way with their own weapon triangle. Eventually, you'll even wind up having to fight combined army and navy battles, which tend to be the most hit or miss sections in terms of fun factor, as the game will snap the camera over to the next unit entering combat whether you want it to or not. The less we talk about the battle for Lelkar, the better. Duels, meanwhile, haven't seen the same huge leap in quality, but when compared to 4's incredibly dry duels, they're far more visually dynamic. Individual duels feel distinct with unique animations for each fight rather than the same 3 animations over and over again until the end of the game. The prince even gets a different ending flourish for each story duel. However, I do have to admit that this is mostly flash without substance. While there was a spirited attempt to bump up the difficulty of duels back to where they were prior to 4 by giving the player a limited time to input their actions each turn, it doesn't do much when 90% of the time the tells continue to be incredibly obvious. Still, the presentation ensured that I wasn't bored out of my mind during these fights like I was in 4, so that's something. And speaking of presentation, I think we can all agree that this is by far the nicest Suikoden has ever looked in 3D. And if you don't agree, fair enough. Games would be dull as hell if we all liked the same shit. Me, I love the pseudo-cel shaded look Suikoden 5 goes for. It finally feels to me like the characters and their portraits complement each other. Couple that with the mocap cutscene animations, and this is the most alive Suikoden has felt since the second game. The character designs themselves are also fantastic in general, save for Shun here and his portrait reminding me a bit too much of Bug Eyes McGee from 4. I'm not exactly the most artistically inclined, so it's hard for me to articulate why I think they work so well. The best way I can think to phrase it is that nearly all of them possess that quality where the design informs and complements their personality. And you can recruit an anthropomorphic beaver who wields an electric guitar. If that isn't a point in favor of 5's character design, I don't know what is. For all that praise, though, I suppose I wouldn't be doing my job / pissing off any insecure horn dogs watching this if I didn't acknowledge that Suikoden 5 does go a bit overboard on the boobage. Jean being fanservice-y is par for the course. I'm half convinced that if this progression had gone on much longer, she would have looked like a DeviantArt drawing by the 7th or 8th game. But 5 decided to front-load more of the female cast than usual.
Look at a pair on that one, Lois. Bigger than your head.
Now don't get me wrong, I like boobs as much as the next straight guy, but it's a bit challenging to take some cutscenes 100% seriously when Cyalides and Zaras have their tits out. And if you don't understand what I'm trying to say, imagine if Luca Blight spent all of Suikoden 2 in an armored mankini.
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
But it is what it is, I suppose. The 2000s were a really horny time in gaming for whatever reason. Also typical for the time, or really any time in gaming honestly, is Hudson Soft providing excellent sound design. I mean, what else am I supposed to say? You get two guys who worked on some of the most beloved Bomberman games to do your music and sound effects, and you're typically gonna get something great. I'm not even a Bomberman fan, and I know that. So let's ramble about anime voice actors instead. Much like 4, Suikoden 5 is fully voiced with an English dub composed of a murderer's row of anime dub regulars. And this time we don't waste Michael McConaughey by casting him as a dead mentor walking. Instead, we have him playing the kind of villainous role he was born to play as Marscal Godwin.
We must not lose sight of our goals. The only things that can guarantee Falena centuries of prosperity are unrivaled strength and absolute order.
With his son Giselle being voiced by fellow Suikoden 4 alum Doug Erholtz.
Now what do you think, Father? All we have to do is wait for our opportunity and seize it.
The fact that the two main villains are voiced by men who played heroic characters in 4 is probably only amusing to me, but whatever. On the good guys' side, we've got the perfect casting choice of Jameson Price as George Prime.
Your Majesty, Commander of the Queen's Knights, George Prime, returning to post, sire.
Yeah, that's pretty much the voice I imagined for him when I played 2. Karen Strassman as Cyalides.
One's language must always reflect one's social standing. Wouldn't you agree, Sir George Prime of the Queen's Knights?
Yuri Lowenthal, because what isn't Yuri Lowenthal in? Doing his best with a shit character like Kyle.
It's been 2 years, but the Queen still won't even let them rebuild. Man, talk about heartless.
Felice Sampler as Lim.
Hey, has anybody seen my brother in here?
And Kate Higgins as her bodyguard Miyakis. I sound like I'm saying a Star Wars word there. Chica no wanka Miyakis.
The waters of the Thetis River are really cold, you know.
There's even a stray Taliesin Jaffe performance in here where he almost sounds like he's using a prototype of the voice he'd later use for Percy on Critical Role.
You didn't think I brought outsiders here as a mere favor to Lucretia, did you?
This is why I hate traveling with holy people. They're too goddamn good.
Suffice it to say that the casting, voice direction, and acting were on point here, helping further enhance an already entertaining story. That story is an intriguing one from a meta perspective as well. I've been on a Star Wars kick since my Bounty Hunter video, so the first thing that springs to mind as a comparison to Suikoden 5's narrative structure is The Force Awakens. Except here the writer isn't a fucking hack with no answers to any of the plot threads he left dangling, but still has the gall to get mad at the answers his successor was forced to come up with on the fly. My point before I lost the plot is that in both cases, Suikoden 5 and The Force Awakens attempt to return to the roots of their respective series, with stories that liberally crib plot beats from the first 2 entries. In Suikoden 5's case, you're a well-to-do noble, a general's son in the first game, Prince of Falena here, framed as a traitor to their homeland and forced to fight back in order to overthrow the corrupt power manipulating the throne. Some other similarities to the first game include how your bodyguard Leon is similarly attached to you at the hip much like Gremio, that your HQ is an abandoned ruin located in the middle of a lake, and your main character's weapon of choice being a staff. The translation calls it a nunchuck, but anyone who's seen the 36th Chamber of Shaolin knows that it's a 3-section staff.
Up from the 36 chambers!
The Suikoden 2 parallels are even more obvious, starting with how this game is built off of the snippets of backstory given to George Prime in 2. On top of Georgie Porgy, we have Lorelei and Killy making their return as well, their simmering rivalry established in 2 being fleshed out more here as Sindar ruins play a major role in the plot. Then we have your strategist Lucretia, who is a walking, talking send-up of Zhuge Liang, aka your boy Kang Ming, even more so than Shu was. Just look at that classy fan. Glorious. And while Clive himself doesn't return, thank fuck, he probably would have come with another timed quest, we do get his Rule 63 counterpart, Cathari. I should probably question how the hell a setting that hasn't even invented muskets can possibly have anyone with access to modern-style sniper rifles, but have you seen that damage output?
This looks like a job for the human bullet! Fire me, boy!
The biggest parallel, though, is a really spoilerific story moment which is damn near identical to a pivotal moment in 2. Right down to my impotent rage at the pig-headed stupidity of the decision on the part of the character in question. Huh? Oh, right. Sorry about that. Boys, be ye warned, we're headed into spoiler territory. If ye be not wanting to be ye spoiled, get thee hence towards this time code. Why am I talking like this? It's not even correct. Before we get to the story beat I was just talking about, we need to roll it back a bit and recap everything up to this point. While the Barrows initially appear to be another source of concern as Salim tries to turn you into his puppet king, their machinations are soon undone by a combination of Lucretia's strategery and Euram's sheer stupidity. The Barrows are outed as the ones responsible for inflaming the Lord Lake citizens into a full-on uprising in order to steal the not quite as strong as the Sun Rune but still very powerful Dawn Rune from the East Palace. Salim's influence crumbles immediately, and even his own daughter abandons him out of sheer disgust over his actions. Oh, Euram played a part too, but he's the kind of idiot you expect to fuck up a bad situation. It's his dad who took advantage of the situation for his own gain. Hell, Euram is so inept he winds up in a sort of Team Rocket role upwards of 3 separate times depending on if you're trying to recruit everyone.
Hold it right there! Euram Barrows has arrived!
After casting off the shackles of the Barrows family, you begin forming a rebellion on your own terms, and from there follow the traditional Suikoden route of winning cities and new allies to your cause in mini story arcs as the main conflict looms in the background. Highlights include smashing a dam with boats laden with explosives in order to get water back to Lord Lake, dealing with a bandit imposter that eventually leads to one of the funniest moments in the game.
I will not let you besmirch the name of Falena's royal family any further, so just wait right there, or beware!
Master Euram, be careful.
I know. I don't need anyone to tell me.
Master Euram!
What is he doing? I don't know. Beats me.
Master Euram, are you alright?
Oh, of course I'm not all right! Why didn't you guys hold me up like you were supposed to?
And the Godwins repeatedly gifting you new allies because they just can't resist war criming it up. Like when they set the pro-Godwin section of Lelkar on fire to aid in their retreat. Or attempting genocide on the beavers and dwarves because the Godwins see them as dirty subhumans. The Godwin's law jokes are so fucking easy, I can't bring myself to make them. As all this is going on, Gazelle tries everything he can to break Lim's spirit and make her a willing puppet, thus ensuring my desire to make sure his death be as painful as possible.
Do you know someone that owns a gun or a knife?
However, little Lim turns out to be one of the most iron-willed women in the entire franchise, refusing to do so much as shed a single tear in order to deny the Godwins the satisfaction.
Don't mess with the princess!
And once she's crowned queen in a sham ceremony, Lim quickly begins asserting herself in court as she puts her own plan into action, decrying her, husband's failures to contain the rebels. Lim announces that she will lead her own campaign against them, giving her the perfect pretext to be present on the battlefield and offer you the opening to rescue her. With the Queen on their side, the rebellion can easily gain the support of the people and overthrow the Godwins without any further loss of life. In a single stroke, a 10-year-old seen only as a pawn by those around her could end the war in an instant. The stones, the brass balls, the sheer chutzpah of this little lady.
It's true. You did wonderfully.
I guess I'm tougher than I look. After all, you are my mother and father, you know.
I've never had a fictional character provoke this level of sibling pride before. My actual little sister, yes, all the fucking time. She's absolutely brilliant, and it's amazing that she's related to a total burnout like me at all. But never with a fictional character. It's too bad Sialeeds is the dumbest motherfucker this side of Joey Atreides.
Have you considered not doing what you're thinking about doing?
I'm sorry, Lim, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to take you back. Back to Sol Falena.
What did you say?
Yes, right as you're about to meet up with Lim and the end of the war is in sight, Sialeeds turns traitor and joins up with the Godwins. In the process, Leon taking an attack meant for you and only saved from death by the power of the Dawn Rune, and only if you have at least 60 recruits by the time you reach this point. So we get the sudden betrayal on the eve of peace, and Gremio's sacrifice reprised in one scene. Who needs a remastered collection when we have them here in one game already? I do. I need it. I just don't have the free time to play it. Now don't get me wrong, the sequence itself is executed really well, and the English VAs do a great job of selling it. Even better is this brilliant little touch when Lucerina, the one branch on the Barrows family tree that didn't rot, tries to comfort the prince, and rather than give the player any sort of dialogue choice, the prince just walks away in silence. It's a great scene that sells the pain and heartache our hero's going through more than words ever could. That Miyakis, who had basically just joined back up with you, has to take Leon's place while the latter lies unconscious in the infirmary for much of the back half of the game, only further drives home how badly Sialeeds' betrayal has wrecked everything. And all of this would be perfectly fine with me if Sialeeds didn't have the most asinine, hypocritical motivation for pulling this stunt. Several hints are dropped after her betrayal that she's not actually on the Godwin's side and has her own agenda. So don't worry guys, she prolonged a brutal war for good reasons. She wanted to make sure Salem Barrows and the Godwins died because she was tired of the nobility manipulating her family through the corrupt Senate. And she felt that her niece and nephew were too inept to handle things themselves after the war. So she gives the rebel army their worst defeat, nearly gets Leon killed, brings her niece back to her abusive husband, emotionally devastates her nephew, gets God knows how many slaughtered when Godwin forces reoccupy Durat Fortress, and the psychotic Kilderich decides to massacre the residents for not fighting back against the rebels, and gives the Godwins all the time they need to figure out how to use the Sun Rune, pretty much the fantasy equivalent of a nuclear bomb, all to kill 3 people who would have likely either wound up dead or on trial for their crimes anyways. Genius, Sialeeds, genius. Fucking Sun Tzu couldn't have come up with a more brilliant strategy if he tried. I would like to take this moment and apologize to Joey for my insulting of his stupid, moronic, cosmically short-sighted plan of waging war across the world to end war once and for all. At least he was a traumatized teenager granted a ridiculous amount of power far too quickly for him to be able to handle it. His plan is the exact kind of childish nonsense that someone with his level of maturity would come up with. Though I still hate the ending where he lives, mind you. Sialeeds, however, is a grown-ass woman who has been through wars of succession. She should know damn well that even if all 3 of them die, that won't be the end of nobility seeking power in Falena. All it will do is leave a massive power vacuum. Taking it a step further and dissolving the Senate and returning to absolute monarchy would be an even worse option, as it would concentrate all the power on the throne and make her family an even more ripe target for manipulation. Considering her utter lack of faith in her niece and nephew to navigate Falenan politics on their own, it sure seems moronic to put them in an even more precarious political situation. Perhaps the only reason this doesn't piss me off more is that at least Sialeeds gets called on her bullshit, Lucretia even pointing out that she's a little different than the Godwins, manipulating those around her to create a perfect vision of Falena with no regard to what those around her want. Of course, the game still expects some sympathy from you because filial piety bullshit. Fuck that. She's a conceited, self-righteous, would-be autocrat who would burn her whole nation to the ground if it meant the royal family became the sole authority in Falena for the rest of time. I couldn't even enjoy Giselle's death as much as I wanted to because the fucker went out with more grace than Sialeeds. At least he owned up to being a monster, and hell, even acknowledged how much he underestimated Lim. Oh, and all this drama gave Marskal time to escape with the Sun Rune. You know, Giselle gets so much of the focus I occasionally forgot there were 2 of them.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them.
Chasing after the surviving Godwin to Ashfall Mountain, we get a surprising send-up of Suikoden 3's finale as you have to split into 3 teams to make it through the dungeon and reach Godwin, which, alongside references to 4 with the presence of Island Nations characters and a side plot centered on rune cannons, means that 5 managed to include a nod to every previous mainline title. Not too shabby. Anyways, those 3 teams wind up led by the Prince, Zweig, and a recovered Leon now in possession of the Twilight. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that whole thing about Cyalides turning out to be a perfect fit for the counterpart to the Dawn Rune that Gazelle's Yandere Stalker struggled to use correctly, thus giving the Godwins another magical WMD. She takes care not to kill her nephew with it, so that evens the scales or something. Once everyone meets back up at the end of the dungeon, you're sadly forced back down to one party while the rest hold off the approaching monsters, denying us the chance for the 18-on-1 ass-kicking Marscal Godwin so richly deserves. Then before the battle, the bald son of a bitch pulls the same damn thing as his son by acknowledging how much he underestimated you and proudly slams the door on any notion that the Sun Rune was responsible for his madness. He's a genocidal despot, but at least he's honest with himself. Maybe that'll count for something when I send him on an express trip to whatever the Suikoden version of the afterlife is called. These are long games, people. I can't remember every bit of lore.
Idealistic youth. If you speak the truth, then prove it to me!
Aha! I knew you'd pull a one-winged angel. Cathari.
I cast gun, prepare to meet God!
Tragically, it turns out that Leon hadn't actually recovered from her wounds, and she dies in the prince's arms shortly after they defeat Godwin. Unless you've recruited all 108 stars, that is! If you did, the prince is able to revive Leon with the Sun Rune through the power of love. Leknot does briefly appear to explain that the Sun Rune, similar to the Rune of Punishment in 4, can be as much a source of life as it is a deadly weapon, all depending on its wielder, but I say the power of love. Schmaltzy? Yes. Satisfying to see after all this kid has gone through? Absolutely. From there, the rest of the ending depends on how well you treated Lim throughout the game. Because I'm not a fucking monster, I wound up getting the choice to stay in Falena and help rebuild, the prince being placed in charge of the reformed Queen's Knights alongside Leon. Oh, and would you look at that? One of Lim's first acts as her own queen was to replace the noble-led Senate with a parliament composed of properly elected officials. Huh. Who would have thought that a girl raised from birth as the heir apparent would possess the political training expected of the first in line for the throne? Did you know about this, Siley? Oh right, you're still dead. Suikoden 5 is good. Like really, really good. So good, in fact, that it was kinda hard to get this video to a similar length as the others. There's only so many ways one can phrase, "This is good, I like this," before you start repeating yourself. The gameplay at long last returns to the heights the series reached on the PS1, without removing everything that worked in 3 and 4. The presentation is fantastic from top to bottom, and a certain character's stupidity aside, I greatly enjoyed the vast majority of Suikoden 5's story and think it's one of the strongest narratives in the series. Though it being built atop a greatest hits compilation of elements of the first 2 games does mean that not everything holds the same kind of impact it did the first time around. However, I found the strength of characters like Lim, compelling antagonists in the Godwins, and the personality given to our protagonist helped set Suikoden 5 apart from its predecessors enough to avoid feeling like a cheap rehash. It is far and away the best of the 3D Suikodens. I'm willing to keep an open-ended assessment of 4 until I've played Tactics, but it'd have to be a fucking amazing game to eclipse 5 in my mind. And if I may be so bold as to say, Suikoden 5 is second only to Suikoden 2 in quality.
Oh, he's a madman! A madman!
What this development team accomplished is nothing short of phenomenal. So naturally, Suikoden 5 sold like shit even in Japan, and the franchise died so hard that they didn't even bother localizing the PSP spin-off. And because of those incredibly low sales, you're looking at about $70 just for the disc of a North American copy. Konami, come here. You know that remaster you just put out of the first 2 games? The director on that was also the director of Suikoden 5. Think you could throw a little ring-a-ding-ding our way and give us a re-release? I'm not even asking for it to be HD-ified. Just an affordable way I can encourage English speakers to play it. I can't endorse or condone piracy for the sake of my channel, but it's not like I can stop it from happening. Especially when you don't give me any affordable option to point people who are now curious about this in the direction of... You're sitting on a hidden gem here, Konami. Don't you like money? That'll be all she wrote on Suikoden for the time being. Next time we'll continue the RPG fun with a game considered to be one of the greatest computer RPGs of all time. Betrayal at Krondor. I'll see you then.
Georg 様まで。Georg 様まで。Georg.
Vindication!